Hey everyone, Erratic here and welcome back. In today's video, we're diving deep into Preservation Evoker gameplay for Season 2 of The War Within. Whether you're new to the spec or a seasoned player, we're going to cover everything from talent builds and stat priorities to healing rotations and how to use our utility, all updated for patch 11.1. If you find this guide helpful, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more Evoker content. It really helps me know that my time is spent well making videos like these. Also, come hang out with me live on Twitch where I stream at least 5 nights a week. Let's get started. Currently it's patch 11.1. Not much has really changed since last season, so if you have watched one of my previous guides, it's really not much has changed, but I do want to go over the changes and kind of go over the playstyle of Evoker. For this season, I want to go over quite a few things. I'm going to give you kind of a breakdown of what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to try to leave timestamps down in the description so you can skip around to whatever you want to see. But yeah, we're going to start off with going over our general specialization. I'm not going to go into detail about every single talent. We'll talk about those as we talk about our abilities later. We're going to go over the hero talent tree in a pretty good amount of detail. All right, then we're going to go over the hero talent tree in a good amount of detail because I do think the hero talent tree is pretty important. We'll go over our stat priority and our gearing. You know, the gems, enchants that you want. Then we're going to go over our healing spells in good amount of detail, go over how our talent tree affects them. We're going to go over our healing cooldowns and then the general healing rotation in arenas. We're going to go over our damaging abilities and then our damage rotation. We're going to go over our utility spells. We'll go over our PvP talents, and then we'll go over the floating talents in the talent trees, the ones that you can switch around. Then we'll talk a little bit about trinket usage. I'll kind of try to go over the best and worst comps for Preservation Evokers. I'll go over our macros and yeah, we'll go from there. So to start off, I want to talk about our general talent build. This is what I would consider the most new friendly talent build, and I'll leave a link to this down in the description. I'm not going to go into detail about every talent, but this is where I would start. If you're just getting into Evoker for the first time, this is the build I would run. We'll go into the detail of the different talents as we talk about the spells later on in the video. Before we go into the talent tree, I do want to talk about what's different in 11.1 versus 11.0. What has changed with Preservation Evoker? The big thing is going to be that rescue now breaks roots. Roots are the downfall of Preservation Evokers. They can completely shut down your Verdant Embrace, which is one of your biggest healing cooldowns. It used to shut down rescue, which is like one of your best defensives, and you just have to be super mobile and you have to be on your teammates as a Preservation Evoker with the 25-yard range. So rescue now breaking roots is actually huge. As of today, or as of tomorrow, all of our healing is going to be increased by 5%. I don't know if you haven't played Preservation at the start of 11.1. We felt a little bit weaker compared to last season. I think a lot of it has to do with the tuning of other healers, but the 5% healing increase will be great. Spirit Bloom is being increased by 20%. Energizing Flame now refunds 80% of the mana cost of Chrono Flames. It used to only restore 50%, so that will help with our mana issues. I think Preservation is kind of known as the worst mana efficiency healer, so any efficiency will help with that. And then our Disintegrate damage is going to be increased by 25% as well. This is really good because Preservation is a very aggressive and damage output healer. And here recently, since the start of 11.1, we felt like we couldn't put out the damage we need to actually be an effective, you know, whatever you want to call it, hybrid aggro healer. The mastery has been changed so that instead of snapshotting the healing over time effects when they're cast, it's actually going to recalculate the mastery every time a healing effect ticks. What that means is our mastery does more healing if your health is above your target. And so now with every tick of, say, Dream Breath or the Spirit Bloom healing over time effect or reversion, every time those tick, it's going to recalculate if your health is higher than your target, and it's going to do, you know, more healing with your mastery. But I think overall this is going to be a buff. The big CC changes in 11.1 are actually one of the things that affected Evokers the most. Basically all the CC in the game now has a little bit of damage threshold that it can take before they break. This was to kind of combat things like polymorph or incapacitates, that kind of thing, breaking on any damage. And what this means for provokers is like you can be polymorphed in the middle of AoE damage and it won't break for a good amount of time. This used to be one of the ways you could outplay enemy teams as a provoker. I know, like when I would face a mage, you know, nullifying shroud can be stolen by them. There's all kinds of purges in the game, so kind of what you had to do was you had to play in with your team so that AoE damage would break these CCs, and now that CCs all have a damage threshold that they can withstand before breaking. It's a huge nerf to Provoker, because Provoker is one of the most susceptible healers to CC due to their limited range. So yeah, that CC chain was kind of a nerf. That being said, one of the cool things that came about with this change is freezing trap can now take a little bit of damage before it breaks, and so hunters aren't running diamond ice as often. And one of the sucky things about diamond ice is it would keep you from emerald communing, and that's no longer the case. Or well, it's not no longer the case, but because they're not running diamond ice traps, you can actually now commune in while you're trapped, which is pretty cool. One of the other buffs that came in, I think, with the 11.1 patch is Dream Breath's healing was increased by 20%. This is, I think it's just good in general. I've tried running the talents to give Dream Breath extra healing, and I know some people have done it successfully. I'm not really a huge fan of that talent, but it does, you know, any extra healing is a good thing. There were several buffs to the Flame Shaper tree, but I honestly I haven't even ever tried it or played it really. It's just never seemed even close to as good as the Chrono Warden tree for Preservation Evoker. You get a bunch of haste, cooldown reduction, all kinds of other things in the Chrono Warden tree that just make it feel too good. The last thing is going to be the tier set changes. So we're going from the last tier, which I think like increased our reversion healing and extra stacking from temporal compression, and now we've got the whole jackpot mechanic, which basically just stacks up healing that'll trigger when your target drops below 40%. And then the big part of the Preservation Evoker tier set is that cooldown of Verdant Embrace is going to be reduced by 2 seconds, which is actually insane, and it's always going to trigger jackpot as well. Verdant Embrace is one of our biggest healing abilities again, so that's going to be huge. So with that out of the way, I kind of want to go over our hero talents. Chrono Warden is insane. It changes your Living Flame into Chrono Flame. This makes it a bronze and fire spell, so if you get interrupted on a Chrono Flame cast, you actually get locked out of 2 schools of magic. So that is the one downside of Chrono Warden, but everything else is a plus. The biggest thing is going to be this temporal burst. When you use Tip the Scales, you're going to get a 30% haste in movement speed and cooldown recovery buff that decays over 30 seconds. So at 30 seconds, it's 30% on all 3 of those things, and then when you're down to 5 seconds, it's only 5% haste, 5% speed, and 5% recovery. This is like one of the most insane. It makes your Tip the Scales just like an absolute insane cooldown to hit. And the thing you have to remember is like Tip the Scales is a 2-minute cooldown, but with this buff that goes off every time you use it, it's really more like 1.5 minutes. It changes your hover into warp, which is basically just like a blink. This is kind of cool because it will allow you to like move over things that maybe you wouldn't want to go through with regular hover, but it's really not that much different. The other big thing of Chrono Warden is this over here. Spirit Bloom heals for an additional 30% over 8 seconds. It gives your Spirit Bloom a healing over time effect, and that is huge. The other part of Spirit Bloom is it also gives you 9% haste if you charge it up to 3 times, which is absolutely insane. The Threads of Fate, I mean, you can read it. It's not that insane of an ability. Temporality makes it so that your hover / warp ability gives you a damage reduction. I don't ever really think of my hover ability in that way. I don't ever think of it as a, you know, defensive cooldown, but it is one. This one here, Time Convergence, it makes it so that non-defensive abilities with a 45-second or longer cooldown now grant 5% intellect for 15 seconds. This is used mostly in conjunction with stuff like Overall and Time Spiral or stuff like this. If you're a new Provoker, I wouldn't worry about this too much, but we'll go into this in a little bit more detail later. This one's actually really cool. It kind of reads wonky for what it does, but really what it does is it just reduces the cooldown of all your empowered spells by 6 seconds. So your Spirit Bloom is on a shorter cooldown, your Fire Breath's on a shorter cooldown, and your Dream Breath is on a shorter cooldown. Golden Opportunity is just a buff to Echo, and then After Image makes it so that your empowered spells shoot out Chrono Flames depending on how hard you charge them, and again we'll go into this in more detail later. For our stat priority, I will always suggest that you look at a website like murloc.io and check out like the top Preservation Evokers to kind of see what they're doing. I like murloc.io because it shows you a breakdown of like the top 50 evokers when you look at just the general specialization page. It's hard to say exactly what we're going to look for as Preservation Evokers because it's early on in the season. People are, you know, going to be getting their 4 sets over the next couple weeks, but my train of thought really is going to be that we're going to be looking for about 20 to 25% haste, and then we're going to want to put the rest in mastery, and that's with basically versatility on every point of gear. Now, once you get comfortable with Evoker, you can drop some of your versatility, and you can like straight up craft haste mastery rings or necks. You can drop versatility on Provoker, but it's going to be dependent on what you see people in arenas doing to you. If you're getting attacked a lot, you're going to want that versatility. If you're not, haste and mastery will just be better. What our mastery does, we talked about this a little bit earlier, is it just does more healing to your allies if your health is higher than theirs. So very good. Haste, you just need haste. Provoker is a very high APM class, and you just need to be able to get your abilities out. Haste is super important, but like I said, you probably only want to get up to about 20 to 25% and then start moving your other stats into mastery. Right now I'm at about 29.81% mastery or haste, which I think is actually insanely high. I didn't realize how high I was getting because I was still used to season 1 stats on gear and I was just going full haste, but I definitely want to move out of this range of haste in favor of mastery. As far as tier set, I would suggest putting tier in your head, shoulders, chest, and gloves. The statting on the legs is terrible. I don't know that I can say for sure that we will want to run 4 set, but I'm pretty confident we will want to run 4 set because just alone the CD reduction on Verdant Embrace seems way too good not to have. And then on top of that, you also get all the insurance stuff. So I would suggest tier set, head, shoulders, chest, and gloves. You want to make sure you have 1 precog gem. That is the 181 primary stat. And whenever a opponent interrupts you and you're not casting, it makes you immune to CC for, I believe, 4 seconds. Even as Provoker, where it doesn't matter as much if you get interrupted because you have 3 different schools of magic that you use, precog is still insane because if you do get interrupted or if you do get precog, then being immune to CC is super, super strong. It allows you to get off some CC or get off some extra damage. It's really, really good. The rest of the gems, again, it's going to depend on what stats you're looking for. I would say Evoker is kind of unique in that you actually can mess around with your stats a lot. I feel like a lot of other healers have very specific stat prios that they want to go for, and you don't get a lot of room to mess around with them. But on Provoker, I would say you can mess around with haste, versatility, and mastery quite a bit. For enchants, I guess we can go over this really quick. On your back, you want Chant of Burrowing Rapidity, which gives you movement speed. I have the wrong enchants on my gear right now because I do some PvE as dev, but on your chest, you want Council's Intellect, which gives you extra int. On your wrists, you want Devotion of Speed, that gives you 1,000 speed. On your legs, you want the Daybreak Spell Thread, which gives you more intellect and mana. On the feet, you want Scout's March, which gives you more movement speed. On rings, I think Curse Mastery is probably the best enchant because it gets rid of crit, which you just don't need or want as Provoker, and gives you mastery, which is a good stat. But you could, put on Devotion of Versatility, mastery, or haste if you would prefer those. I think those are a little bit cheaper too. On your weapon, I think there's actually people who run all 3 of the weapon enchants, but for me, I would suggest Authority of Fiery Resolve, especially if you're newer to Preservation Evoker. The next thing I want to talk about is Essence. We have abilities that use mana or essence or both. We actually only have 2 abilities that use essence. One's going to be Echo, and then the other is going to be Disintegrate. I'm going to talk about Disintegrate more in the damage section, but Echo, it costs 2 essence and is going to duplicate the next healing spell. And just as a general rule of thumb, you want to be using Echo before every healing spell. We'll go into it a little bit more detail here in a minute, but generally that's how you want to use Echo. So now we're going to kind of dive into the healing portion of Evoker. I'm going to go over every ability and then talk about the talents that enhance them, and then we'll go over a rotation here in just a minute. So Reversion is going to be kind of our most important spell. So we are now in a follower dungeon just so I can show you kind of how some of the abilities work on your teammates. Reversion baseline is going to instantly heal your ally for 15% of the damage taken over the last 5 seconds and an additional amount over 15 seconds. But the thing is, you can echo reversion somebody, which means it does double the effect. So you're healing them for 30% of the damage they've taken, and then it also gives them that hot. But that's not all. The next thing I want to talk about is Grace Period. related, because when you have the reversion hot on somebody, your healing is increased by them by 10. And when you echo reversion somebody, you're getting 2 of these buffs on them. So kind of like how Resto Shaman will always want to keep Earth Shield on the main kill target, you always want to keep double reversion on a kill target as well. If I, echo reversion this mage, they're going to have 2 of these buffs. They're going to receive 20% healing, have double hot. Keeping double reversion up is super, super important. The other thing about reversion is it can trigger Life Spark, which gives your next living flame a chance to cast instantly and deal 50% extra healing and damage. So this can come from the initial cast of reversion or also the healing over time effect. So if I just sit here with echo reversion on a target, we'll see I should get a proc up. Yeah, so here's our proc. So now we can hit him with the instant cast living flame. So keeping echo reversion up on your main target, and usually on a second target I try to as well, just gives you lots of those procs, gives everybody 20% extra healing. This is probably the most important part of the Evoker toolkit. The other thing I want to mention about echo reversion is it's really good at healing burst damage. So even if you already have double or echo reversion up on a target, if they are just getting pounded with damage, it doesn't hurt to hit them with a second echo reversion and maybe even a third echo reversion if your echo reversion is up. You don't want to use it this way all the time, but when they're taking massive damage, sometimes that's what you have to do to get through the damage. One of the crappy things about reversion is specifically with Cyclone, your reversion damage doesn't calculate. If you're sitting in a 5-second Cyclone and you hit somebody with the echo reversion right out of the Cyclone, it's not going to calculate correctly to the damage they've taken in the past 5 seconds. It's going to do like the minimum healing. So keep that in mind. It's only reversion. No other CC does it in the game. I think it's a bug, but yeah, it's definitely something you have to keep in mind when you're playing Evokers. You need to have a different game plan if you get stuck in a Cyclone. Verdant Embrace is going to be our next really big ability in our healing toolkit. Verdant Embrace is going to shoot you to your target. It's going to heal them and you for an amount of damage, but it's also going to apply this life bind buff, which is probably like the second most important part of the Evoker toolkit. And the thing you have to remember is that if you echo one target and embrace a second target, it's going to give you all 3 of you life bind, and what life bind is it bonds your life with an ally, causing your healing on either partner to heal the other for 40% of the amount. So basically what this looks like, when you echo one target and life bind the other, and then you throw out healing, it's going to duplicate on everybody with life bind. This is how you can get through massive AoE healing on Preservation Evoker. And like I said, our tier set makes that a 2-second less cooldown, so you want to keep this up as often as possible. I would say in terms of threes and solo shuffle, you virtually always want to echo one target and embrace the other. Even if you have a target that's not taking damage, this is the best way to do big healing. Occasionally you will have to like echo and verdant the same target, and there's nothing like necessarily wrong with that, but it is more effective when you echo one target and verdant the other. The other thing you have to kind of keep in mind is that verdant embrace is going to shoot you to your target, so it will make you susceptible to CC depending on where they are. You basically just have to keep in mind your positioning and where it's going to put you when you hit verdant embrace, because it will cause you to maybe go into bad positioning. As far as the talents that get affected by Verdant Embrace, the biggest one we want to think about is Call of Ysera. Verdant Embrace is going to make your next Dream Breath do 40% more healing, or your next Living Flame 100% healing. We'll talk about this more when we get to Dream Breath, but making sure you use Verdant Embrace or have this buff up before you Dream Breath is going to be super important. You will use Chrono Flames, or it says Living Flame, but it's talking about Chrono Flames as a Chrono Warden. After a Verdant Embrace, we'll just make the Chrono Flames do a huge amount of healing. I would say it's like probably like, if you echo it, it could be 50% of a health bar. It's pretty good. The other thing I would mention is that Verdant Embrace can actually be used, it can put you in bad positions, but it also can be useful on like Z-axis maps. If you have like, if you're on Magoombla or the Roadrone and maybe you have someone up on top of a ramp and you're getting trained, it can be useful to position you up to X axis to, avoid maybe melee damage, that kind of thing. It's just good to think about all the different ways you can use it. The next thing I'm going to talk about is Spirit Bloom. I keep saying like each one of these things is the most important part of the healing toolkit, but like so is Spirit Bloom, right? So again, before every healing spell, you want to use Echo pretty much every single time. But every time you use Spirit Bloom, it doesn't do more healing when you charge it. It does healing to more targets. So as often as you can, you want to charge it for 3 hits, because what that's going to do is it's going to hit 3 partners. Now, if you've echoed one target and Verdant Embrace the other target, and then you echo and Spirit Bloom to 3, you're hitting all 3 targets with the initial Spirit Bloom, and that healing from the Spirit Bloom is going to duplicate on all your targets. So this can be used as massive AoE heals. And then on top of that, you're getting the 30% additional healing over 8 seconds. That does not get duplicated by Echo. And then for every charge of Spirit Bloom, you're also getting 3% haste. So if you charge it 3 times, you're getting 9% haste for a short bit. Also, on top of that, Spirit Bloom is a charge spell. So if you charge it up to 3 times, you're sending up to 3 Chrono Flames to your targets. Now, Chrono Flame can be used on enemies for damage or friendly targets for healing. So let's say you echo one target, Verdant Embrace the other one, Lifeline on everybody. You echo one target, you Spirit Bloom all 3 of you, you're getting duplicated from the initial burst of Spirit Bloom. Everybody's getting healing over time, and you're going to hit people with Chrono Flames, which also do a massive amount of healing. This is going to be your bread and butter as a Chrono Warden. I just want to show you what this looks like, okay? You're just gonna have to watch the healing numbers on the screen because it's gonna be kind of insane. Okay, so we're gonna echo one target, we're gonna embrace the other, we're gonna echo, then we're gonna hit a 3 charge Spirit Bloom. I mean, you can see the Chrono Flames that came out. If I was further back, you could have seen them more, but that's just so much healing with that little combo there. That's going to be like when your team is missing health and your Spirit Bloom's up, you want to be hitting that as often as possible. The thing I will mention is there's a talent that lets you charge up your empowered spells even further. There is no reason to charge up a Spirit Bloom past 3 charges because it's not going to do any more healing. It's just going to hit more targets. The only time that might be good is if you have like hunter pets on your team or something like that and you're trying to heal pets, but there's no reason to ever charge it more than 3 times in 3 shuffles or 2s. Dream Breath is going to be another empowered spell. So this is going to do a set amount of healing, and depending on how long you charge it, it's going to do more healing up front versus over time. The 1 charge, it's going to do the most healing over time and just do a little heal up front. At the maximum charge, it's going to do a lot of upfront healing and then put a very small hot on your targets. This will generally always be used as a single charge ability. Mostly what you're looking for out of Dream Breath is for it to be a maintenance heal that you just kind of keep up to take care of your targets when you're getting stuck in CC or, you know, just general maintenance healing. I kind of slept on this ability for a little bit, you know, no pun intended, but it's actually really, really good to keep up on your target, especially with the Ysera's Embrace or the Call of Ysera talent, which makes your Verdant Embrace do or increase the healing of your next Dream Breath. There is a talent down here, and we'll talk about this later, that you can go into, but you can increase it even more. The way you kind of want to use Dream Breath is you want to make sure you have the Call of Ysera buff up from having Verdant Embrace, and then I would say you want to echo 1 to 2 targets before you let off a Dream Breath so that you're getting, you know, huge healing on your targets for the full duration. So kind of the way I would use Dream Breath is I'm going to echo 1 target, Verdant Embrace the other, and then I'm going to echo 1 target, echo a 2nd target, and then I'm going to use a Dream Breath. And that's just going to do massive AoE hot healing to your targets. Your Dream Breath is always going to hit you, but there's nothing wrong with, you know, echoing yourself too to get that healing. But you can just see we're doing massive healing with Dream Breath on all of our targets. That's kind of just generally, you want to throw that in whenever you have Dream Breath up. Just make sure you have the Call of Ysera buff up, and then I would try to echo. I pretty much always try to echo 2 targets before I hit Dream Breath, but if you really only have 1 teammate that's taking damage, it's fine to just echo 1 target. Our last spell is going to be Chrono Flame. This does a decent amount of healing, but you won't ever really just be sitting there hard casting Chrono Flames. I think every other healing class in the game kind of has an ability that you do this with, where you can just spam the heal if you need to, but you really wouldn't ever want to be doing that as an evoker because that's not really where your power comes from. If you're keeping double reversions up on 2 targets, you'll be getting instant cast Living Flame procs, and it is 100% fine to use your instant cast Living Flame procs to heal your targets, but even then, most of the time you're going to want to be using Chrono Flame as damage rather than healing. But you can see here I echo Chrono Flame and it does a very good amount of healing rather. So we have several modifiers. The other thing with Living Flame, you want to be using the instant cast procs as often as possible because your Living Flame has a 20% chance to make your next essence ability free. And that's actually something we kind of didn't mention earlier, but we should have mentioned Essence Burst when talking about our essence, power. Essence Burst is going to proc, making your next essence ability free. Again, that's either Echo or Disintegrate. So getting these Essence Bursts as often as possible is really good because it's just going to give you a lot more time to, either do damage or do more healing. Oh, we are actually going to talk about that next. So yeah, Living Flame, Reversion have a chance to trigger Essence Burst, making the next essence ability free. This talent here, Spark of Insight, consuming a full temporal compression grants you a temporal burst. What is temporal compression? We should have talked about that as well. Every time you cast a bronze spell, it will make your next empower spell reach its maximum level in 10% less time. So what are our bronze spells? Well, Echo and Reversion are going to be our two biggest defenders. We have other ones, Stasis, Tip the Scales, Rewind, Time Dilation, but really the easiest way to get temporal compression is going to be, Echo Reversion, and having a weak aura to track this, somewhere here in the middle of the screen. I think this is what this is. It shows that I have a full temporal compression. If I consume a full temporal compression, you can see how fast the Spirit Bloom casts. It's going to give me an Essence Burst. So that's something to keep in mind as well. When you're new to Evoker, I wouldn't focus on consuming temporal compressions, but as you get more advanced at Evoker, you definitely want to be using those, especially on like Fire Breath and then Spirit Bloom. Getting them off quickly is a lot better than getting them off, it almost decreases the cast time of your empowered spells by like half, so it's pretty insane. All right, so that kind of covers all of the healing cooldowns, or all of our healing spells, but now I kind of want to go into our healing cooldowns. The first one is going to be Stasis. I mean, this is just like our biggest cooldown. The way Stasis works is once you hit Stasis, it's going to store your next 3 healing spells. And then once you release the Stasis, it's going to cast those 3 healing spells in rapid succession. So at the start of an arena, you're going to want to get your Stasis set up pretty much as quickly as possible. There is some preference involved in Stasis, but especially if you're new to Evoker, my suggested Stasis is going to be to, echo a target, hit your Stasis, and now it's going to record the next 3 spells. The 3 spells I'm going to record are going to be Verdant Embrace, Echo, and then 3 Charged Spirit Bloom. So what this does is that gets the initial healing from Verdant Embrace, and it also puts Life Bind on that target. If you echo someone before you release the Stasis, it's going to, Verdant Embrace this target. It's going to get Life Bind all 3 of you. You're going to echo, and then you're going to get a 3 charged Spirit Bloom, which is going to, do massive AoE healing, put in a hot on all your friends. It's going to release, the flames, the Chrono Flames, you can see here. It's just a super, super powerful combo. I have seen other people also do Verdant Embrace, Spirit Bloom, like a 3 charged Spirit Bloom, and then Dream Breath. So it just becomes a massive AoE healing. The reason I don't like putting Dream Breath in Stasis is because Dream Breath is a conal effect, and there's a range on it. Spirit Bloom, if you release it from Stasis, even if you're like super far from your team, I believe it still heals them. But the problem with Dream Breath is if you release that from a Stasis and you're maybe you're in a blind and you're like going back and forth, because that's what blind does. It just makes you look a bunch of different ways. Like your Dream Breath could go off when you're facing away from your team, or maybe you're in a CC and your team's been dragged away from you, so it's not hitting. It becomes a lot less useful in those situations. But I do know some people who like that combo. Instead of waiting to release their Stasis when they're in CC, maybe they're releasing it proactively when they know the Dream Breath will hit. So it's probably more up to preference, but as far as my preference and recommendation, I'm going to recommend your Stasis is Verdant Embrace, Echo, and the 3 charged Spirit Bloom. Stasis can be released during any CC, and I will go over some macros later that will allow you to release it when you're in, even clone, stuns, whatever. It's one of the biggest things that makes Preservation viable. I know people have complained about our ability to do that because it's like a cancel or a macro, but I honestly, without that being a mechanic of Preservation Evoker, I don't see how it would be viable. And then Stasis should just be kind of used basically at the start of the game, and then anytime it's off cooldown, you want to try to get that combo in there. So if you see it coming up off a cooldown, you may be holding on to Spirit Bloom, for 5-10 seconds to make sure you can get it into your next Stasis, especially in Shuffle. Like when you use it right off the bat, usually around that, 1.5 minute 2 minutes into the game, that's where you're really starting to feel the pressure again. So getting that next stasis setup is really important. Our next big healing cooldown is going to be Emerald Communion. I think as a new provoker, you're going to think this does big AoE healing, and it can, but you have to use it correctly. If you just hit Emerald Communion, what it's going to do is it's going to heal you up to 100%, and then any of the overheal, after you hit 100%, any of the overhealing is going to go to your teammates. So if you hit this and you're at 50% and you're trying to heal your entire team, it's not going to heal your team until a couple ticks go off and you're at 100% health. The way to get this to do massive AoE healing is to echo one target and embrace the other. That way all three of you have life bind, and so any of the healing it's doing to you is also duplicating to your teammates, and it's also going to duplicate to you. It's going to get you to full health quicker, and then that overhealing is going to hit your teammates. It's basically a chain of reaction. You can't always get an echo verdant embrace off before you communion. A lot of times it's like your oh shit button when you're stuck in CC that you can use it in, but ideally you want to echo verdant embrace before you Emerald Communion, because if you don't, it's not really AoE healing. It just transfers some of the overhealing to your teammates once you're at full health. So just so you can kind of get a visual of what it looks like when you use it correctly, echo one target, verdant embrace the other target, and I'm going to communion, and you can see everyone's getting massive healing, which is true because I'm at full health, but it also would be true even if I wasn't at full health. That is the best way to use it. Emerald Communion also restores 2% mana per tick. So if you know you're going to be in a dampener game, you want to try to use this early on so that you can maybe get a second use out of it, or maybe third use out of it for mana reasons. You can't use Emerald Communion when you're cycloned or in Diamond Ice. I believe the Demon Hunter banish, I think they have 2 banishes. I don't know if that's still the case, but one that's breakable and one that's not. If they're playing the unbreakable banish, I don't think you can use Emerald Communion in that as well. So just a good rule of thumb to keep that in mind. Maybe you need a trinket, or you just need to have a plan once you get out of those CCs. Emerald Communion does require line of sight. It kind of feels like it shouldn't, but if let's say your teammate is this guy right here and you Emerald Communion here behind the pillar, they're not getting any healing unless they get in the line of sight. So if you're in comms with your teammates, you need to tell them hey, stay in my line of sight. In shuffle, there's not really much you can do, but just try to make sure you're in a position that will allow the Emerald Communion to actually do healing. Rewind is going to be kind of our last big healing cooldown. It reverses 33% of the damage all allies have taken in the last 5 seconds within 40 yards. So this is actually a bigger range than your regular evoker range, and it's actually, I guess it's 66% when you're not in a raid, so that would be any arena. It is the best healing cooldown after large AoE burst. I don't think there's any other class with a better instant hit cooldown than this. If somehow your entire team gets hit for 80% damage in 2 seconds and you hit rewind and it's quick enough, I hit it too quickly, it's going to reverse huge burst damage, and that's really when you want to use it. You don't want to be stingy with rewind. I say that it's kind of a hard thing that you have to get used to hitting at the right moment. If you're too stingy with rewind and your team's just getting rotted down slowly, it's not going to give you much value. It's so much better to use it right after burst damage to maybe save other cooldowns. So if you see your entire team taking a huge hit of damage, hitting rewind over Emerald Communion could be a much better option because you may not run into that situation again. The good thing about rewind is it does not require line of sight. So if you are behind a pillar, or a mage puts down an ice wall, or rogues are in the smoke bomb, it can heal through that. And especially with rogues, that's kind of the cooldown I save for a smoke bomb go that I don't have an answer for. So yeah, good to keep in mind that it doesn't require line of sight. And the only other thing I'd like to mention about that is that it does not calculate damage correctly in cyclones again. So if you get cycloned and your teammates go from 100 to 20% damage, and you come out of that cyclone and you hit rewind, it is not going to do any healing other than that base healing. I don't know if you were watching the NPCs here when I hit rewind, but it only did 50k per tick as the baseline amount of healing, which is god awful. So do not use it coming directly out of a cyclone, or you're going to be a very sad dragon. Rescue is a very unique cooldown with our talents here. Rescue. We're going to get a 30% damage absorb shield for 5 seconds on both you and your ally. And the other part of rescue is you just get to reposition your ally. And it is really, really good. It's a really good cooldown because, like, honestly, this can be your best cooldown a lot of the time. Quite often, it is a better cooldown than Rewind or Emerald Communion, because if you can just get your partner out of line of sight, then you can heal them up. And you're not using that 3-minute cooldown, that 4-minute cooldown. I just want to show you something here. I want to see if I can pull these NPCs over here. Okay, so we can see our little target right here. Rescue can move people somewhere where they are not in directly line of sight of. So like Captain Garrick here isn't in line of sight of this corner over here, but I am. So it's kind of hard to show you because I have an at cursor macro, but basically as long as you are in range of your target and in range of where you're wanting to go, you can pull them around. So like, let's say they're getting, demolished by people over here, range DPS that are alongside this pillar. I can hit rescue, pull them over here, and then I have time to recover before the DPS that was on that side of the pillar has time to come around. So that's really how I use it. You have to remember that you get a shield on both of you, and the other thing is you can rescue while silenced, and now you can rescue while rooted. So it is actually an insane ability. The other cool thing about rescue is it's really good for Z-axis movement. I kind of wonder if we can test that. I don't want to wait 30 seconds, but like, again, I just like to use Magombala or Robodrome as examples. You can pull your DPS from a lower level to an upper level. And that's one of my favorite ways to use rescue, because that buys you so much time when you're facing, classes that don't have an answer to that. For the most part, you want to be using rescue before your other cooldowns. The only exception to that, I would say, is maybe if you know it's going to be a dampener, you might want to use Emerald Communion super early. The next thing I want to talk about is just our general healing rotation. So for the most part, we want to keep double reversion up on our main target. I would say you want to keep up double echo reversion on a second target, just so you can get the living flame procs. It's good, and plus you just have that buffer of 20% extra healing if you need it. For Verdant Embrace, I want to echo one target and Verdant Embrace the other target, so I can keep life bind up on our targets. I want to be basically using Verdant Embrace on cooldown with an echo as often as possible. We want to be using Spirit Bloom whenever we have, as our basically just our main big heal that's not a cooldown. And you always want to echo before the Spirit Bloom. And if possible, you want to have the life bind buff up before it, but it doesn't hurt as long as you keep up, as long as you echo before it, because you're going to get a hot. We do always want to 3-charge it as often as possible to make sure that we get that extra benefit from our after image talent. For Dream Breath, we want to make sure that we have the Ysera's Call buff up from using Verdant Embrace, and then we want to echo one target. I would say ideally try to echo 2 targets so that you can keep up double Dream Breath hots. Not only is it good for healing, it's good for dispel protection, that kind of thing. And just kind of remember that Dream Breath does require that you are facing your teammates. So yeah, you can't just use it willy-nilly without knowing where your teammates are, but use that pretty much on cooldown and try to echo 1 to 2 targets before you use it. You're going to get life spark procs throughout the games. Reversion healing ticks have a chance to make your next Chrono Flame instant cast. As you need it, use them as healing. They're going to be used as damage, I would say, more often than healing, but 100% use those as big instant cast heals. And then when you have targets taking large burst damage, you can use echo reversions, one after another to deal with some burst damage. In between, like that's basically if you don't have any other abilities to use. If you're out of abilities, but you have some reversions up and echoes, yeah, go ahead and use them. The one thing I will say with the temporal compression is we have a full temporal compression now. If you are essence starved and you want an echo, but you don't have one, you can drop a quick fire breath to get an essence burst so that you have the ability to use another echo. So when you're feeling echo starved, just remember that probably more often than not, you have a full temporal compression on hand, and you can pop a quick fire breath or dream breath if you're wanting to get a big, spirit bloom off. Fire breath obviously is what you would want to use if you're really worried about healing. That way you can echo and, do a big spirit bloom or echo dream breath. But yeah, that's just something to keep in mind. Once I started realizing that I had the ability to cause an essence burst basically on command, that helped me out with being essence starved quite a bit. Now for damage, we have I think I want to say 3 damaging abilities. Is that right? 3 main damaging abilities. The first one's going to be Chrono Flames. It gets enhanced by our hero talents to do a little bit more damage. And we're going to have a lot of free Chrono Flame instant cast procs. So as often as possible, you want to be using those instant cast procs as damage. Like that's the whole part of Provoker, is you want to be doing damage as much as possible in between healing. That is how you're going to succeed. While we're on the damaging portion of Living Flame or Chrono Flame, I have to bring up this talent over here. It's called Adaptation. Absorb 20% of your effective healing, and it gets added to your next Living Flame. So this is a talent you'll pretty much always have, and basically what this means is you're going to cast like 1 heal and it's going to fully charge this. So you want to be using a Living Flame as often in between every, heal or 2 to get full effect of this. It's going to make you do more damage. It's really good. The other thing is the Leaping Flames talent. Fire Breath, which we're going to talk about here in a minute, is going to cause your next Living Flame to strike 1 additional target per empower level. So if you fully charge a Fire Breath and then you cast a Living Flame, it's going to hit additional targets. The one thing I would say to watch out for is, and this is less of a issue now with the CC changes, I guess, but I know I would always break CC targets because I would be maybe going for a tip the scales Fire Breath into a Living Flame, and it would shoot off to everyone on the enemy team and it would break CC. I haven't really tested with it too much. I would assume that CC can now take 1 Living Flame without breaking, but that's the only downside to this talent. When you fully charge Living Flame, you're going to be sending out Chrono Flames to the entire team, which is just massive damage. The next damaging ability I want to talk about is Fire Breath. This is like so big for Preservation Evoker. It does damage to enemies in a cone. As you can see here, it's a very narrow cone. So the longer you charge it, the more upfront damage it's going to do and the less damage over time it's going to do. The shorter you charge it, the more damage over time it's going to do and the less upfront damage it's going to do. Now, what makes it really good for Preservation Evokers is the Scouring Flame talent. For every charge of Fire Breath, you're going to burn away 1 magic effect on every enemy target hit. So let's say you're playing this talent up here, the Font of Magic, where your empowered spells are maximum level is increased by 1. You can now charge it 4 times. So if you hit all 3 targets on the enemy team for a 4 charge Fire Breath, you've just removed 12 magic buffs with 1 global, which is actually insane. The other thing you need to remember is that our after image applies to Fire Breath as well. So the longer you charge Fire Breath, it's going to send out more Chrono Flames to your targets, which is just more damage, more AoE damage. As often as possible, you want to hit full Fire Breath as Preservation Evoker. There is this talent here, Life Giver's Flame, that you may play sometimes, which makes it so that your Fire Breath heals allies, but in general, I think this is a more advanced talent that you would pretty much only take if you're trying to go for the Renewing Breath talents, which again, I don't know how much I could recommend these at this time. I only mention that because we're talking about Fire Breath and there may be like melee cleaves or something like that, or maybe, Demo Locks, BM Hunters, where you're just getting massive healing from doing cleave damage. But if you take this talent, you need to be using Fire Breath on cooldown or you're not getting value out of it. And yeah, that's really it. Make sure you fully charge Fire Breath pretty much anytime you can to get the benefits from your talent tree. And Scouring Flame is a PvP talent that you'll be running a lot, but we'll talk about that more in a minute. Deep Breath is another damaging ability. I'm just going to mention it here. I would say it's used more for its utility than damage. With the talent down here, Terror of the Skies, you're going to stun every target that you hit for 3 seconds. The other portion of Deep Breath is it makes you CC immune while you're in the Deep Breath. And I would say a very good portion of the time you want to use Deep Breath in this way as a way to avoid CC rather than just the damage or the stun. It's obviously very good if you can, stun 3 people and, maybe you've got a Tip the Scales Fire Breath and your team's got to go, but it's very good way to avoid CC when you know it's coming and you don't have another answer for it. Deep Breath, you do not want to use at maximum range. This is a 50-yard spell, so it could go like all the way over here. You don't ever really want to use it that way because that entire time that you're in the Deep Breath, you're not casting spells, whether they're damage or healing. So I'm trying to think of a good way you could use it that way, and you just don't. You honestly want to like get right up on your targets and then Deep Breath for the minimum range to get the damage out, to get the stuns out. Deep breathing at max range is very, 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 very bad. I'm just going to show you guys how far it can go, and we can count how many globals you might be able to get in. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Like, you're missing 4 globals if you do a max range deep breath. It's just not good. You want to be doing, I wish I could use it again really quick, but basically I just want to go from here to here to get the, you know, maybe the stun effect or the damage of the deep breath as often as possible. That was one thing. I had a VOD review done by a rank 1 Sleepyhead, and he mentioned that, and after I switched to doing short deep breaths, like, my entire life changed. Our last damaging ability is going to be Disintegrate. This uses essence, so you have to be very careful on using this because it is also what you use for healing. It's what you use for echoes. So use Disintegrate as often as possible, but only with essence bursts, because it's too expensive to just use your actual essence on. It does a lot of damage. It slows the target. And yeah, so with this talent over here, Energy Loop, which you actually will be using quite a bit, you're going to be doing more damage and regenning mana. So as often as you can, you want to use Disintegrate, but you only want to use it on Essence Burst, and it also requires that your team be up. But as a Preservation Evoker, you're very tempo, very aggression based. So when you're doing more damage, you're applying more pressure to the team, making them play more defensively, which in turn is giving you the ability to be more aggressive because you're not having to do more healing. It's a very, yeah, I mean, tempo is just the only way to say it. If you fall behind and you're having to cast healing and you're not casting damage, then you're kind of not playing Provoker correctly. And sometimes that just happens, right? But as often as possible, you want to be aggressive. So when you see those essence bursts, you need to be thinking to yourself, can I use this on a Disintegrate? We do have Azure Strike, which, okay, it does slow them. I don't know why it doesn't say it in the tooltip, but Azure Strike, I don't ever use that way. I honestly don't even use Azure Strike. You could almost play Evoker without having it keybind, but I do think it's worth at least mentioning that, you know, you can apply a slow with an instant cast on your enemies if you need to. That really covers our damage rotation. Yeah, so I'm going to keep Echo Reversion up on myself. You can see I have an Essence Burst here, and really our damage is going to be casting, you know, Fire Breath on cooldown. I'm casting Chrono Flames as often as possible, Disintegrates with our Essence Bursts, and whenever we have the instant cast Living Flames, using them as damage is really good. I'm not getting any right now, but realistically that's just what it is. You want to be casting instant cast Living Chrono Flames. If your team is far ahead, you're not having to do any healing, I mean, you don't have Essence Burst and you have Living Fire Breath on cooldown, you can cast actual casted Chrono Flames just over and over. I do it all the time, but you just have to be careful because if you get interrupted on it, you're getting locked out of 2 schools. That being said, if you're so far ahead that you're not having to heal and they're playing so defensively, you're adding more pressure. They're most likely not going to be trying to interrupt you because they probably got more important things to do, like stopping your DPS. Yeah, so just use Fire Breath on cooldown, max rank, Disintegrate with Essence Bursts, and cast Chrono Flames in between healing spells as much as possible, especially with the instant casts. All right, now to go over Preservation Evoker's utility spells. Tip the Scales is going to be our biggest cooldown. Like I said, from our Chrono Warden tree, it's going to give us a huge haste, movement speed, and a CD reduction buff when we use it. And this is going to make your next empowered spell be instant cast. Do not ever use Tip the Scales on Dream Breath. There's 0 situations where that is a good play. Typically, you're going to be using Tip the Scales on Fire Breath. Occasionally, you might be using it on Spirit Bloom, but Tip the Scales, Fire Breath, especially when you're playing the Scouring Flame talent, is going to be pretty much the best way to use it, because that's going to give you an instant cast, huge damage buff that shoots out Chrono Flames, that also dispels every target hit, you know, between 1 and 4 times. Tip the Scales, that's how you kind of want to use it. I would say that most, like, you kind of want to get this up early in the game. I don't want to say this should be your first global, but like basically as soon as your team is engaged is when I try to use it. You know, as you get more advanced, higher up in rating, you might want to be saving it for very specific situations. But the thing is, if you're holding it too long, like let's say you save it for a minute, then you've already wasted a good portion of this cooldown reduction that you could have gotten to getting it up again. You do want to use this fairly early, and then pretty much every time it's off cooldown. Most often use it on Fire Breath, but obviously you can get a full cast Spirit Bloom off, which isn't bad either. Sleepwalk is our main casted CC. This is actually another change that I forgot to mention earlier in the video, but Sleepwalk no longer has a cooldown, so you can just spam cast it. So that's kind of unique to this season. We did used to have a PvP talent, but you wouldn't really run it very often. But now that we have it off a cooldown, you basically want to be casting Sleepwalk fairly regularly on targets that are not DR'd, right? You want to be looking for setups. You want to be looking for like maybe sleeps you can get off of stuns or sleeping off targets when your team's doing a go. It's really good for us to have. It's honestly hard to get used to when you're not used to having a spammable CC like that. But looking for CC or looking for sleeps just as often as damage is kind of important now to the Provoker toolkit. I guess I should just mention that DRs with other disorients, including fears, blinds, mind controls, dragon breaths. I think I'm talking about, I don't know what I'm talking about there. Cyclones and other similar effects. Our next spell is going to be a Pressing Roar. This is a very good cooldown, which will increase the amount of your next CC by 50%. I actually don't think it's 50% in PvP. I don't know exactly what it means, but like, let's say I Pressing Roar and then I Sleepwalk, it's going to be an 8-second Sleepwalk. You can't see the cone on it. I mean, you can see it when I cast a spell, but it's a conal attack in front of you, and it's really good. So you can have Pressing Roar multiple targets, and then you can get your team can get some massive CC to set up kills. So if I had Pressing Roar this guy and then I hit Sleepwalk, you can see that was like a 10-second CC. I don't think it's that long in actual arenas. I want to say 8 seconds is the maximum. Maybe it's 9 seconds. It might be 9 seconds, and I just always see 8 seconds because like it immediately goes from 9 to 8. But yeah, Pressing Roar, very, very good. I would say it's more effective to use off of a target that's already CC'd. I think one of my biggest mistakes when I was first getting into Provoker is like, especially at the start of the games, I would try to Pressing Roar fly over all my enemies. But if you Pressing Roar a target that is not CC'd, especially a healer, they can just dispel a Pressing Roar. And if they're a good healer, that's what they're going to do. So you want to, I would say more often than not, you want to be using a Pressing Roar on targets that are already CC'd and trying to get a follow-up CC off of it. The other thing I want to mention is the talent down here. We do have a floating talent, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but we can play overall, which makes a Pressing Roar have a 30-second reduced cooldown, which is really good by itself, but it also removes one enrage effect from each enemy, so it can be good against certain classes. Although I don't know that I've ever like specifically used it in that way. I'm sure there are better Provokers than me that do. Quell is our ranged interrupt on a 40-second cooldown. It locks them out for 4 seconds. It's really good. You need to be trying to use this on cooldown. It can be used while you're silenced. It's not a magical ability, but that also means it doesn't work when people are CC immune. So like, I think like if a warrior intervened your target and you quelled, you would actually interrupt the warrior, or like it doesn't work through BOP, you know, where some other interrupts might. So you have to keep that in mind. But a lot of times, like if you're root beamed, which honestly isn't as much of an issue anymore, but you can interrupt in root beams, you can quell while you're silenced. It's really, really good. I would say as an evoker, you're so susceptible to CC that you should really be looking to use quell on just regular offensive damaging abilities rather than just CC, because I feel like a lot of the time as evoker, this is something I fall trapped to too often, is I'm saving it for a casted CC, when in reality I'm usually getting instant CC'd and then a casted CC out of it, so I never get to use my quell to stop it. So really just stopping damage can be just as effective or more effective than trying to stop specifically casted CC. You can also cast it while you're communing. That's another thing that I should mention. So like, let's say you're in your commune, you have a druid casting like Cyclone, or maybe a priest casting Mind Control. And that's like two of the most common things, because if you get Cyclone while you're in the middle communing, it completely stops the healing. If you get Mind Controlled while you're communing, it will heal their team instead. So just keep in mind that you can quell while you're Emerald communing, because that is a huge thing that will stop the counters to your spell. Naturalizes our dispel. It removes magic and poison effects. So you kind of have to remember that against like rogues or other poisoning classes, like maybe Serve Hunter. You also get all the poisons off of a target as well. You need to be trying to use it on the highest priority dispels. It's kind of hard to tell you exactly what that is. I know sometimes I'll use it. I'll like use a dispel on, you know, some like damaging ability maybe, and then a casted CC go out and I can't do anything about it. Don't dispel a poly if there's a Hodge up. Yeah, that kind of thing. The other thing I would like to mention is Naturalize cannot be echoed. It kind of seems like you could, but you cannot. That being said, you can put a Naturalize inside of Stasis. Naturalize does count as an ability in Stasis. So if you have some super Giga Chad play where you want to naturalize something off of a target in your Stasis, and then, you know, release a Stasis next time you get CC'd, you can do that. Very hard to use that way, but I have seen it done. Cauterizing Flame is kind of like the same thing as Naturalize. It's a dispel, but it also dispels bleeds, poisons, curses, disease, and diseases effects. So this is really good for curses from like affliction locks or any type of lock. It's really good for Havoc. I think that's what Destro lock ability. It's really good for, you know, rogues with Death Mark. It's really good against warriors, Thunderous Roar. It's really good against feral druids with their bleeds. It's really good with Hex. So yeah, you need to be keeping all those things in mind when you're facing specific classes. Like, what will you be using Cauterized Flame on? It does have a long cooldown, but it also does a good amount of healing for everything that it dispels. So keep that in mind. A lot of times you might think like, I can't afford not to heal my target and cast Cauterize, you know, to get rid of, you know, this one bleed or something like that. But you have to realize like it's actually doing some healing as well. So good to know. You have our two racials. One of these knocks people's up, and then one of them knocks them back. Obviously, the knockback can be really good on Z-axis arenas, or maybe just to get some distance from a target. But both of these are more often than not, I would say, used to be an extra interrupt. These both will stop people from casting. That being said, Wing Buffet I actually do use in a lot of different situations where there's like an effect on the ground that gives the enemy team more healing. So stuff like the bubble from Disc Priests, or AMZ from Death Knights, or Darkness from Demon Hunters. You can go, you know, knock somebody out of their defensive ability, and I think that's something that will really set you apart as a good provoker if you can do that automatically and quickly. Hover. I should talk about this because Hover gives you a buff to where you can cast while moving during the duration of Hover. Hover also stacks, so if you use 2 in a row, you don't miss out on the full benefit of Hover. You do need to keep that in mind, like when you might need to be casting while moving, and be careful not to just cast Hover randomly. I still struggle with this sometimes, as I'll just like be, you know, in super aggro mode casting Hover just willy-nilly, and then get to a point where I actually need a Hover charge and I can't use it. We have a lot of things that modify our Hover. One of the big ones is our PvP talent, Unburdened Flight. This makes you immune to movement reduction effects. This is going to be very important. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more later when we go over the PvP talents, but Unburdened Flight is huge for Preservation Evokers in certain scenarios. It's really important to manage your Hover to be offensive, and also defensive. More often you want to be offensive as a provoker, so keeping up with targets and making sure they don't get away from a kill, that kind of stuff is why it's important to manage your Hover charges. As far as utility, is that everything? I want to mention Spatial Paradox. I don't remember who taught me this last season. It might have been Wolf, and I think he wanted me to keep it a secret, but I would be remiss not to mention this. Obviously, Time Spiral is a really good ability that allows you to give you and your teammates an extra major movement ability. When you use this, their abilities will light up that it's giving them extra charge of, like for warriors, it's like Heroic Leap, and like rogues, it's Sprint or something like that. It gives yourself an extra hover charge. This can be a very good ability. Spatial Paradox has actually become one of my favorite talents, and I don't know that it's used a ton by a lot of people, but what Spatial Paradox does is it doubles the range of all your abilities. So you can Spatial Paradox and hit somebody with a sleep from 60 yards away. And one of my favorite ways to use Spatial Paradox is actually to hit Spatial Paradox and then a Pressing Roar. So a Pressing Roar has I think it has the same range as Fire Breath, or maybe it's Dream Breath. Can I see how big Pressing Roar is? So you can see how big that was. So what that effectively does though is it doubles the range of that. And so the best way to use Spatial Paradox is in the opener against rogues. You hit Spatial Paradox and then you Pressing Roar where in the general area you think they're going to be. Obviously we have this rooting ability, which is a good way to get out rogues, but the Spatial Paradox of Pressing Roar covers such a bigger range, and it also gives you the ability to get into combat super quickly against rogues. Yeah, don't sleep on Spatial Paradox is what I'm trying to tell you. All right, next we're going to go over our PvP abilities. For my general setup, this is going to be my default setup: Nullifying Shroud, Scouring Flame, and Obsidian Metal. The first one is Nullifying Shroud. This is a 1.5 minute cooldown. It makes you immune to the next 3 CCs you would receive. This is a very good ability, but it's also very frustrating because there are a ton of purges in the game. Mages can steal your Nullifying Shrouds, so they can just completely take them off of you and then also get the benefit themselves, which is super frustrating. I wouldn't run it against Arcane Mages, but I would say the other 2 mages, sometimes it still can be very useful to use them, because if they're using 3 globals to get the Nullifying Shrouds off of you, it can still be good. Priests can purge, Resto Shaman can purge them, Hunters can purge them. I mean, everyone basically has a way to purge them fairly quickly. So even though it seems like a super powerful ability, it also is very well known by the PvP community, and you're probably not going to keep them up for very long. You can protect your Nullifying Shroud by keeping HOTS on yourself. So Echo Reversion, that counts as 2 magic abilities they have to get through. Also, an Echoed Dream Breath will also count as 2 abilities on yourself, and that can be purged off. That being said, I wouldn't necessarily use a Echo Dream Breath to protect your Null Shroud, but just realize that keeping extra magical abilities on yourself is a good way to protect your Nullifying Shroud, and keeping Echo Reversion on yourself against classes that can purge your buffs is actually like pretty much a must. That is something else I changed after getting a VOD review from Sleepy that improved my gameplay a bunch. Protecting your Nullifying Shroud with like Echo Reversion. Pretty much you want to use it on cooldown. Obsidian Metal prevents you from, or it makes you immune to interrupt, silence, and pushback effects while you have Obsidian Scales up. So it's basically going to turn your Obsidian Scales from a defensive to a silence immunity, which is perfectly fine as Evoker, to be honest. Basically, I mean, you basically just use this to like be offensive against casters without the worry of being silenced. Or maybe if you're getting a stasis set up and you need to make sure that you get your abilities out, using this can be really good. It's really good into classes like Death Knights or Shadow Priests who can blanket silence you. So using it when you know they have their silence up and you're, you know, struggling to keep healing up. I pretty much always use Obsidian Scales this way. Yeah, it's just really good. Another one is Rogues. It's really good against, you know, to not get corroded by rogues, that kind of thing. Scouring Flame, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but it makes it so that your Fire Breath purges 1 magical benefit per empower level. It's very, very effective against classes like, you know, Resto Shaman, other Preservation Evokers. I'm blanking, but it gets off Altered Time. It's really good against Restoration Druids. I don't know why I'm not remembering that, but you get off 4 HOTS, you know, if you get a fully charged Flame Breath. Power Infusion, another really good buff to get off. It's not as necessary as it might seem, especially if you have other Dispels on your team, but it is one I would highly suggest, especially to newer Evokers who are maybe trying to decide which one to take. It feels really good a lot of the time. Dream Projection, I actually haven't seen anyone run Dream Projection in a good amount of time. Projection does a decent AoE healing afterwards, and it dispels people with magical effects. Basically, what it does is when you hit it, you float around in a ghostly form, and then you can hit it again to let go, and it does a healing over time effect to everybody that you hit and dispels them. It is a way you can dispel yourself of magic damage, or of like a polymorph. Like if you use that ability, someone polymorphed and you released it, it would get you out of that polymorph. But it's really hard to use that way because people would just interrupt you too, right? I feel like this isn't as good as it used to be, and I couldn't really tell you why. I feel like the healing isn't as high as it used to be, but it can be good against classes like Elemental Shamans or people with a lot of dots that you're not worried about the dispel effect on. You have to be careful using it against stuff like Affliction Locks, because like let's say you use Dream Projection, you release it on your entire team and you dispel everybody of a unstable affliction. That's gonna suck. You're probably gonna die. I've killed myself several times using Dream Projection that way, and from what I've heard, Affliction Lock is getting like scarier this season. I don't know. I haven't used this ability in a while, but it's not something to forget about because there is potential where there's a meta in the future that it is useful. I just don't think it's very useful in the current meta. You know, Shadow Priest could be another one that it's good against. A Time Stop is a advanced PvP talent to use. It kind of looks like it's like an immunity that you would use like a bubble, but it's not really that. I think Time Stop in most cases is used to keep yourself from getting CC'd. So you see a mage casting polymorph, you don't have interrupt, your entire team can't shut it down. You can hit yourself in a time stop before the polymorph goes off, and then you come directly out of it just to continue playing. That's how most often how I see it used. I use polymorph as an example, but it's good in all kinds of scenarios. Jungle, for example, like you see that the hunter has their stun trap up, you see the pet running at you, you can potentially time stop the pet stun and shut down their go. It's a very high skill cap ability. I'm not good at using it, but that is how you would use it. I would generally use it as an ability on targeting yourself. You don't very often use it as a time stop on your teammates because you can't heal them while they're in it. The only time that would be good is if you use it right at the start of an enemy's burst and then they don't switch their burst off at all. It's hard to explain like kind of why it isn't good, but hopefully that's a good enough explanation. Swoop up is not one that you would really ever use. It kind of works like a reverse rescue. You can fly an enemy to a location. You can target an enemy and reposition them. This could be very, very specifically good with certain comps. Maybe some, like what comes to mind is like maybe Draco Cleave, where you could pull an enemy healer away from their team or something like that. But I legitimately have never seen it played. Dreamwalker's Embrace, really good into melee cleaves. This is going to tether you to your ally. Anyone who passes through the beam is going to take damage. That damage is going to transfer into leech healing for you and the person you're tethered to, and it's going to give both of you a movement speed increase. When I like to use Dreamwalker's Embrace is I like to use it instead of Obsidian Metal when the enemy team is not going to have a bunch of ranged kicks. So stuff like Ret Warrior and Ret Warrior, no, I'm just kidding, but kind of, I'm not kidding. Yeah, really just stuff without ranged kicks, but like even Turbo can be hard to use this on because the Enhanced Shaman's got a ranged kick. Chrono Loop, I haven't ever used this as a Preservation Evoker, but I've seen Devastation Evokers use this in a successful way. This stops an enemy or traps them in a time loop, and you can release this ability at any time to return them to the health they were at when you cast this ability, but it cannot bring them below 20% health. So it's pretty good if you get a target low, you know they're not going to get the kill. You can use it on them. Their enemy team uses all their cooldowns to top them off, and then you return them to 20% health. It can be pretty good, but it's very hard to use. I'd say especially as a healer. Yeah. Divide and Conquer is one I've never seen a Provoker play. It puts up walls on the side of your Deep Breath that LOSs both you and the enemy team. I wouldn't suggest it really ever. Okay. Yeah, so with that out of the way, let's talk about our floating talents. So I talked about a little bit earlier about the basic build that I was going to leave in the description, but realistically, this is more often what my tree is going to look like. Our floating talents are going to be this one right here, Inherent Resistance. You can move this between taking less magic damage and doing more magic damage. If you're facing, a comp that doesn't have any casters on it, I would suggest Instinctive Arcana, and a lot of times maybe you just want to run this anyways because you're wanting to be super aggressive. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but like if I'm facing, two casters, I will generally take 8% magic damage reduction just because it seems pretty good. And then down here, this talent can kind of be moved around a little bit. You can play Time Spiral, you can play Spatial Paradox, you can play Overall. It kind of just depends on the comp you're playing, the comp you're playing with. That's really it for the class tree. I can't really think of anywhere else you would want to put these abilities. Landslide is an ability that shoots out a landslide in a straight line and it roots everything in your place. You need to make sure you're using this against, melee cleaves, stuff like that are trying to stay on their target. You can use it against BM hunters to shut down their pet damage. You can use it to get people out of stealth. If you're wanting something super passive, Overall is a good choice because it's not an extra ability you have to hit. It reduces the cooldown of your Pressing Roar, so you can hit that more often. And then it also removes our Enrage effect, which again, I don't really think about, but I think could be good against classes like Warriors, maybe Hunters, other classes that enrage. And then we come over to our Specialization tree, and this is where it gets a little bit different. Yeah, so the first ones we were going to talk about is taking Time of Need versus Energy Loop. I think Time of Need is a little bit better in solo shuffle because there's not the coordination. It can kind of save your allies when you're stuck in CC. But as often as possible, I think Energy Loop is a really good option as well. Makes your Disintegrate do more damage, and it generates mana. I think this Energy Loop's a little bit better in threes. I think Time of Need's better in solo shuffles, but play around with both options, see what you like. Yeah. Spark of Insight, you could also switch this out for Disintegrate, but I prefer to switch these two out rather than switch this off. Spark of Insight's really good. Consuming a full temporal compression grants you an Essence Burst. I was talking about that a little bit earlier in the guide, where you can just use an empowered spell to get you a free Essence Burst. That comes from this talent, and I would say you want to keep this as often as possible. That being said, with the buffs to Renewing Breath, I know some people are trading out these two talents for the Life Giver's Flame, which heals people for your Fire Breath damage, to get more Renewing Breath healing To me, this isn't worth it. The Life-Giving Flame is hard to get full value out of. These are my favorites. Titan's Gift, Essence Breath increases the effectiveness of your next Essence ability by 25%. This is really just passively making your healing better, is all I can really say about that. You might change out Titan's Gift for Life-Giver's Flame into certain comps that are going to be stacked or have a lot of pets, but yeah, even then I feel like Titan's Gift, especially just if we're talking about noob friendly, this is going to be the best way to go. This is the other float talent here. If you don't need to be fully scouring like HOTS and stuff like that, flow state is generally better to put a second point into. So like against Rest of Druids, I probably want Font of Magic, or against other Preservation Evokers, I like to run Font of Magic. But if you don't need that extra empowered level, I would put 2 points into flow state. Now for trinket usage, I wanted to discuss this a little bit. We talked a little bit earlier how Cyclone kind of shuts down several of our abilities. So Cyclone is like when you have a Druid on the enemy team, you kind of need to think about how you want to use your trinket. Do you want to use it immediately into full Cyclone so that way your reversion and rewind aren't messed up? Or if you're not going to use it that way, you need to be thinking about how you're going to deal with the damage that is done while you're in that CC. I would say more often than not, you want to trinket early because you have 2 other big cooldowns that you can use, or like trinket as your first save. The only exception to that would be when you think the game's going to go into dampener, you might want to Emerald Communion, then trinket, and then think of what your next save is going to be. Really, stasis is going to be your first save, though. You'll be able to stasis out of any CC for the first go. Rescue is one of the best options out of trinket. If someone's getting trained here and you have rescue, you can trinket rescue them around the corner and recover there. Gives them a shield and gives you time to recover. The other good option is going to be trinket rewind, and that's only going to be if it's not a cyclone. If you get stuck in a 5-second kidney and your team takes massive damage and you're at 3 seconds and they're not going to live, you can trinket rewind, and that's going to give everyone back to full, and it doesn't require line of sight, and it has a huge range, so rewind is really good. Communion, you don't ever want to trinket communion. Trinket communion is terrible because for the most part you can communion in every CC other than Diamond Ice, Banish, and Cyclone. You want to save communion for use when you're in a CC that you can use it in. As far as the best comps for Preservation Evokers, this is mostly me talking with other high-level Prevokers. The one that is suggested the most is Rogue Boomkin. That always seems like a really good one. A Rogue Devastation Evoker, really Rogue anything with Preservation Evoker is really good because it allows you to be so much more aggressive with your damage. Yeah, Rogue is pretty freaking good. I really like running melee cleaves. Ret Warrior has been one that I've really enjoyed. Turbo, that kind of stuff, because you just get to be in with your DPS. You're not having to worry about line of sight or range issues. And then you also have the ability to just do lots of damage with those type of comps. And then I think Warrior caster comps are also usually really good. Like Warrior Priest is one that I played a lot, but I'm sure there are several others. Some of the worst comps, I hate healing Warlocks and I hate healing Mages, and I think most Preservation Evokers agree. Warlocks, it's nothing against them, but it's just their whole defensive kit is kiting between their gates and their ports and stuff like that, getting out of line of sight and just letting their dots do damage, that kind of thing. And it just doesn't play well with the Preservation Evoker toolkit, where you have a 25-yard range and you're constantly verdining, embracing to them. You embrace to a Warlock and they take a gate 40 yards away, and then you're running and you don't have your verdant embrace to get to them, and it's just an absolute nightmare. Mages just seem like they're hard to heal. Like the Preservation toolkit doesn't work well with them because it's hard to keep them up. I don't know. I guess it's like the altar and the squishiness, and it's kind of the same thing. They're constantly moving and trying to kite super far away, and it just becomes an issue with the range for Provoker. Double caster comps in general, I would say, are harder for Provokers to cast. But if you're playing coordinated threes, in comms with your teammates, you can definitely still make them work. And I've even seen some people put Preservation as like the best healer or a really good healer with like shadow play. It doesn't make sense to me, but it's not to say they won't work. For macros, our rescue macro is just a cast at cursor rescue. If you have someone targeted and you cast this, it's going to try to rescue them to where your cursor's at. So instead of hitting rescue and then having to click somewhere, it just instantly casts it. It's just a much quicker way to use the ability. I would highly suggest that. Deep Breath is the same thing. At cursor deep breath, I don't have to you know, hit the ability and then click where I want to go, I can just hit the ability and I'm off. This is especially good for when you're trying to use it to avoid CC, because that extra click may take you too much time to actually get it off. The only thing I will say with this is like deep breath can sometimes be wonky to get off because of different line of sight issues, especially with ramps and stuff like that. But I would say overall, deep breath at cursor macro is much better than using it without. Landside, same thing, just at cursor landside macro. All of these are going to be down in the description and in my written guide, which you can click in the description as well. At target macros, I think this is the only way to do damage as Evoker. There's probably going to be people who disagree with me, but for example, my Disintegrate, I have an at target macro. What this does is if I'm targeting a teammate and they're targeting an enemy, it's going to cast Disintegrate on their target. So I don't have to switch over to the enemy target to cast a Disintegrate. I can keep my friendly target that I'm healing targeted and do damage to their target without having to switch targets. I have that same thing for Living Flame, where it casts on the target of my target. So I can just target my teammate and cast Living Flame on their target. That being said, for Disintegrate, I don't need multiple buttons, but for Living Flame, I do have a regular Living Flame button, and then I have the target Chrono Flame button, because sometimes you want to actually cast a Chrono Flame on your friendly player and you don't want it to go onto their target. Oh, we talked about this earlier, my stasis release macro. What this macro does is it releases your stasis no matter what. You can just hit stasis again to release it, but it won't work if you're in certain CCs, like Cyclone, I think stuns. It actually may not work in any CCs. I couldn't tell you for sure because I've used this macro so long. Yeah, so this will release your stasis no matter what you are. You can use it while you're in deep breath too. You cannot play Preservation Evoker without this macro. This is absolutely must have. I do have Arena 1, 2, 3 macros for Sleepwalk. So yeah, I mean, just Arena 1, 2, 3 Sleepwalk macros. This will cast Sleepwalk on your first, second, and third target. It's just, I could not play with the casted CC without using this. I have the same thing for my Quells, Arena 1, 2, 3 Quells, so that I can quell them without having to switch targets if I don't want to. I do also have a Focus macro quell because I'm much more effective with hitting this if I'm just hitting the one button for my focus. Arena 1, 2, 3 is a lot more, for at least for me, is a lot more difficult to hit the correct target quick enough than it is with a focus macro quell. For time stop, when we were talking about it earlier, this macro just makes it so that time stop is just cast on myself. The downfall to this is I can't use a time stop on my teammate if I wanted to, but like I said, time stop is really only used to keep yourself from getting in CC or to avoid massive damage on yourself. So yeah, I think that's a really good macro too. The last macros I have, which you could just keybind these, but is party 1, 2, 3 targeting macros. There's so many healers that do this, so it's not like this is the only one, but I got this from Dilbar, where he scrolls up to target party 1, scrolls down to target party 2, and clicks his scroll wheel to target party 3. To me, since I've gotten used to this, this is the best way to target your party. And if you're clicking your targets or mousing over on your targets, switching to this will improve your gameplay experience just tenfold once you get used to it. It always sucks to move from what you're used to something new, but I cannot suggest it highly enough to get actual targeting macros for your party as a healer, because it just makes it makes everything so much better. But yeah, I think that is really it. I'm sorry that this was such a long guide. I really do try to keep it concise, but I think it's important to go over how everything works together and go over the different situations. That stuff is useful so that you can actually improve Provoker, because it's like, you know, I felt like I was good at Provoker up to a certain point, and then you learn, you know, some of the more intricate parts of it, and it actually improves your gameplay drastically. So yeah, if you like this guide, make sure you leave it a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the arenas.